It's been a long time coming. I'm a first-time author, so I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to make it up as I went along and figure out the hard way. So what it was back in 2016, I had the idea. I'm a millennial, I'm an older millennial, and I just saw these recent reports coming out about negative stereotypes about millennials, and it didn't ring true to me. It didn't feel right to me. I'm like, well, where are the stories about, real life millennials doing real things, and especially within the space industry, which is an area I'm so passionate about, what I've dedicated my life towards. So I took it upon myself to interview over 100 millennials for this book in a variety of fields and a variety of backgrounds and different countries. And I got a really good sense of where millennials were coming from and also what they hope to accomplish. It's a very forward-thinking book. I wanted to get an idea of where millennials hoped that we would go next within space and why, and also get an idea of what they thought millennials would accomplish before we retire. So just a very forward-looking book, but also I wanted to probe under the surface with my questions about some of those stereotypes that millennials encounter. So millennials are they are well connected, or they're impatient, or they're entitled, all these different things that we hear that are negative. I wanted to sort of probe those stereotypes to try to understand where they're coming from and if they hold true, but without directly asking people, of course, because no one's going to attribute those negative things to themselves. So it was an interesting book in that I got a lot of varied responses, but almost overwhelmingly the responses were very optimistic and positive. It ended up being a very refreshing book, because I think in our industry, in the space industry, it's very cynical sometimes, and it's very negative, and this thing is delayed and that thing is canceled. And within the interviews of this book, I found just people who had not yet been overwhelmed by that cynicism, crushed by it. Instead, they were very optimistic that we, I should say, will accomplish a whole lot going forward. So it's been a journey writing this book, and I'm looking forward to other people reading it and letting me know what they think.
So over 100 stories from people. That's great, the feedback. Who do you think is the best person to be reading that book? Is it other millennials who want to find out, okay, what's the direction, or is it older employers potentially?
Yeah, I have three audiences for this book. The primary one is millennials who are working in the space industry, just so they know that they're not alone. Because that's what I felt when I was reading or when I was browsing the news stories back in 2016. I'm like, well, this doesn't ring true. And I feel very alone, even though I'm not alone. Millennials are now the largest working demographic, at least in the United States. But I want other millennials who are working in space or planning to work in space to feel like they belong. The secondary audience is older and to some degree younger, Generation Z, and figuring out, how they relate to these stories. And unfortunately, preliminary feedback that I've gotten from a lot of older people who work in the space industry was very negative. And we maybe see this with this okay boomer trend, right? We tend to have these clashes of generations, and I hope they don't see that way when they read the book, because within the book I take care to describe how people are people, and it's hard to generalize based on generations, and it's hard to generalize based on where people are in their stage of life. Someone who's straight out of college has a different perspective than someone who's near retirement, and so it may just be a differences in age, or a difference in status, or different priorities of where you were raised and what values you have. But on the other hand, there was also quite a bit of positive feedback with millennials saying that they appreciated their older colleagues for their advice and their experience, and so I hope that they can take it both ways. But that's the secondary audience for this book, are primarily older generations who work in space. And then, of course, the third audience is the general public, who may or may not have any ties to space at all. Of course, everyone does, but without realizing it. But anybody can read this book. I really try to make it accessible to anyone by not taking too much time to have explainers in the book, but where I needed to, explaining, okay, what is the International Space Station, and what is this, and what is that? Just making sure that it's very accessible to my parents or whoever else might be reading it, so they can understand what it is that we do.
More engineers are not going to solve your problem. It's not a technical problem in that sense. It's a process problem. And the time to fix your processes was 20 months ago, and the second best time is today. This is Jason Kanigan, the president of Cold Star Technologies and the host of this podcast, the Cold Star Project, which is all about identifying and solving process problems for space companies, because that's what we do. And you can hear the entirety of this episode by following the link in the comment below.